Okay, so who's got questions? Jordan, go ahead.
So I wanted to ask about like I was reading this article about migrants coming from countries in Africa like Sudan as refugees, and how they've been being held in a camp in the Negev called um uh just a second. Um
It's not gonna matter.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, and like it's like they're not being given like resources there and like that sort of thing.
So I don't know about that specifically. Israel has a huge refugee problem from Sudan that occurred, and supposedly as part of like the normalization with Sudan, it's supposed to get better. I think like a lot of the Sudanese are supposed to be heading back. I'm not sure exactly, but like in South Tel Aviv, which is like the crummy part of Tel Aviv, it's become crummy because you have all these refugees that aren't given citizenship, right? They're not Jewish. So in Israel, the only people that have like a quote unquote right, most countries don't have such a thing as a right to immigrate into the country, right? America doesn't have such a thing, right? No one has that you have a right to become a citizen if you don't live in the country. So in Israel, the only people that have that right are Jews. So a lot of non-Jewish refugees, I don't even know how they do it because you can't like, I don't know how they get in, how they sneak in. I'm always curious about that. I just never looked at it. But they're like notoriously poor and have lack of resources just because there's no way they're going to get resources, right? So, and I think that's a common problem with all migration around the world. I don't think that's limited to Israel. But like, I would find it hard to believe that the state of Israel took a bunch of refugees, put them in a camp concentrated in one area, and then didn't feed them enough. If you get my drift, right? That would not look good for Israel. So I don't know, but I really I don't know that much about the story. I know we have a big migrant problem in Israel. I don't know more than that. Yeah. At first, I thought you said migraines, and I was like, "What? That sounds strange." Okay. Any other questions? Maybe something that I haven't answered to. Nothing. Oh man, this is not good. Okay, so let's get on to stuff that I wrote that we'll talk about. Okay, so look, the biggest thing that's going to be happening with Israel, I would assume over the next year is going to be Iran. And again, we always talk about like what are the big issues that Israel faces, and we always talk about issue 1, 2, and 3 is Iran, because Iran always presents an existential threat to Israel. Okay, if they develop a nuclear weapon, then they could really end Israel as it stands today, or ever again. So Iran is always going to be the biggest problem that Israel faces. Um, the question is the under President Bush, like the second. So we had just started putting heavy sanctions on Iran to sort of encourage them away from a nuclear weapons program. President Obama stepped it up, but then midway through President Obama's, like I guess, like at the beginning of his second term, the Iranians expressed interest in negotiating, which would have been a great thing had we really stuck it to the Iranians. In other words, what we should have been doing was negotiating and putting on the pressure. We had the advantage, right? The Iranians needed something from us, and we needed very little from the Iranians. But the Iranians really needed what we had. We had frozen all of their money, so they had no access to their funds. They kept most of their funds in banks around the world, so we were able to stop them. We disallowed anyone from conducting trade with them, so they weren't able to trade. So they and then more sanctions and more financial penalties really put Iran in a bad place. So we had the advantage. President Obama got schooled on negotiating with them and signed a very poor deal with the Iranians. So that was it. That was the deal. And then President Trump came to power, and President Trump just pulled out of the deal. without getting anything from the Iranians. So now the Iranians essentially went back to the late 2000, like 2008, 2009, 2010, but now they're just more capable nuclear wise, right? So now they start, they're not going to, they didn't go like full blast, like, you know, onto a nuclear weapon, because there's no real, there's, Iran knows that the minute they develop a nuclear weapon, the minute they have that nuclear weapon, so, right, or they come close to getting a nuclear weapon, Israel's going to attack. So there's no way Iran is going to fully acquire a nuclear weapon until they're 100% ready to use it, right? So if Iran has, let's say they know that they are 6 months away from getting a nuclear weapon, so they're not going to put that final push unless they're ready to use that nuclear weapon right away, because they know every single country, enemy country that has developed a nuclear weapon, meaning Iraq and Syria, the minute that they came close enough to having a nuclear weapon that Israel was concerned, Israel attacked them and blew up their nuclear facility. So Iran doesn't want that to happen. They don't want to get attacked. So they're not going to go full forward on their nuclear plan until they're ready to like use it against Israel, right? Because at that point, it's going to be a race. Do they get attacked first, or do they get to use it on Israel first? Okay, so Iran pulls out of the, America pulls out of the Iran deal, and now President-elect Biden felt that pulling out was a bad deal. That was a bad idea. We should be back in the deal. So he wants to be back in the deal. Iran wants to be back in the deal because Iran is sanctioned like crazy now by President Trump. So Iran wants to get back in the deal. The question is going to be, now going forward, what kind of deal do they agree to do going forward? That's going to be our biggest question, okay? And that's where you're going to see a lot of fighting going on for the next year. We're going to have to be lobbying like crazy. We're going to need everybody talking to the administration not to get into a bad deal. And the administration, to its credit, is having an internal debate. Obviously, there isn't an official administration, but there's the office of the transition, which is like the office that goes, you know, from when you're president-elect until you're president. You have an office, and they're debating now about whether or not what kind of conditions should they agree to get into the deal. Okay, so that's where we're standing right now, before we go forward. Okay, I see that two of you have questions. Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah, this might sound like not like stupid, but I probably should know this. But what are like the pros and cons of that Iran deal? Like, I don't really know the details of it.
The first Iran deal, like the one that President Obama signed.
Yeah.
So the pros of it was that it postponed Iran's ability to enrich uranium. Enriching uranium means you take the stuff from the ground and you purify it by spinning it really fast for a long time. And then if you do it enough and purify it enough, then you can use it. It's weapons grade. It can be used as a weapon at that point, okay? So that it stopped them from doing that. They weren't allowed to do that. They were supposed to have destroyed all their what are they called again? The you spin uranium in a what? Centrifuge, right? Thank you. Right. So they were supposed to have. Thanks, Dan. So they're supposed to have stopped it, cemented their centrifuges. Evidently, they didn't do them all because they started enriching again, right? Since President Trump pulled out of the deal. So that was the benefit of it. The negative of it was that inspections could only happen after a 25-day warning, right? So you say, oh, we think you're cheating. Okay, we have 25 days until you can inspect, and then they'd obviously throw everything out. That's number one. Number two is there was something called the sunset clause, which means that if they showed in good faith and they weren't caught cheating, or they weren't cheating, so then after 15 years, which is coming up, they can restart to enrich uranium, but only at a lower level. Right now, even at the lower levels, they can't do it. But once you start enriching uranium, it's very hard for anybody, unless you're doing constant inspections, it's very hard for them to go ahead and like know if they're enriching a little ahead of time, right? And as if you say no enriching, then there's no reason why a centrifuge should be spinning. But if you have a whole factory of centrifuges spinning and you say, why are those spinning? And it's for medical purposes, you'd be like, oh, okay, could be, right? So that's the sunset clause. Another negative is it didn't address Iran's terror activities, the fact that they're a state sponsor of terror, the largest state sponsor of terror. It didn't address the fact that Iran can develop ballistic missiles. In order to hit something with a nuclear weapon, you have to have the right type of missile. You have to have a ballistic missile. Iran right now doesn't have a ballistic missile. So if let's say it takes you 15 years to develop a nuclear weapon because you need the technology and everything else, but one of the things you have to develop is a ballistic missile. So Iran can just take the next 15 years to develop ballistic missiles and then work on a nuclear weapon again afterwards, right? Once they're allowed to. So the deal allowed them to work on the delivery system of a nuclear weapon while still complying with the deal. It literally just says we ask Iran not to do ballistic missile. Within the first year, they're already testing ballistic missiles. That was, I don't know if you remember this, but the videos where they would write like Hebrew on their missiles and then aim them at a Magen David on the side of a mountain and blow it up. So those were the ballistic missile tests. In case you weren't 100% sure what they were going to use the missiles for, they literally wrote it out. So on the side of the missile.
Right?
What?
Medical research, right?
Medical research, right, for a ballistic missile. So, so those were the problems that people had, right? So that's it. Some people like they don't think, and I hope you don't know anybody like this. I unfortunately know many people, and they're like, you can't have a deal with Iran. That's why Joe Biden's an anti-Semite. So, like, first of all, President Trump, I mean, one of his campaign promises for a second term was that he would get a new Iran deal, a better deal, within 4 weeks of getting reelected. So no matter who had won this election, everybody would be trying for a deal. Okay, there's only two options to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. One is a deal that we like, that they agreed to stop, or two is we attack Iran, start a war, regime change, and put in a regime that's better for us. We're not doing that. No one's doing that. We tried that in Iraq. And it's going to be a good 30, 40 years before an American president is stupid enough to try that again. So that's not going to happen. Okay. So we have to have a deal. The question is, we want a good deal. That's what we're looking at. So we're going to have to be pressuring the Biden administration to make sure that they don't give in just to have the political victory of getting back in the deal. If you put some of the Obama people back into power, to guys like Ben Rhodes, and Wendy Sherman, the people that negotiated the first deal. Okay, so these people are like the worst negotiators in the world, right? And Wendy Sherman negotiated the Iran deal after failing. It's amazing that this woman could get a job in the government, but especially as a negotiator, because under Clinton, she's the one that negotiated the North Korean talks, which failed. Like they signed a deal with North Korea that they cheated on, and they couldn't catch North Korea on the cheating. And they just said, okay, who should we get to negotiate the Iran deal? Let's get that same person. It's very hard to find any analogy that's difficult to come up with on that. It's like, you have a basketball coach that doesn't win a game. Let's hire him for the next season, right? Like, it's just, I mean, you find the one person in the government that is, we fully aware failed, and we hired that one person. So if you put her back in, or if you put John Kerry back into that place, or you put Ben Rhodes, you put these people that did the first deal, they're going to be like, let's go right back into the deal because it was such a good deal. President Obama used to talk about how the deal was lacking. He used to say, this is not an ideal deal. This isn't the ideal that what we did, but we had to get something done in order to postpone the nuclear program. So that's the thing. So I don't think President-elect Biden is as desperate as Barack Obama was to get a deal. You have to keep in mind President Obama didn't have one foreign policy success until the Iran deal. Okay, there wasn't one. So he really needed something before the end of his presidency to say, I did something well. And this was really the only thing. The only question is whether there are going to be 150 Democrats in Congress, 150 members of Congress just signed a letter to President-elect Biden saying that we fully support you going right back into the deal, meaning they don't want the deal moderated at all. They don't want it modified. They want to go right back into the deal. They just want President-elect Biden, the minute he takes the oath of office, to step off that stage, call Iran and say, we're back in. No changes to the deal at all. So that's not what Joe Biden has been saying. What President-elect Biden has been saying is that he wants to make changes to the deal. And that should be obvious. It was surprising to me to see some of the names on that letter. Now, if you're and pardon the expression, but if you're a member of Congress who doesn't really understand this deal, right? Doesn't understand the nuclear threat of Iran. Okay, so you're a member of Congress from, I don't know, from like Detroit, let's say. Okay, and you're focusing your whole life on auto workers, and you have a couple of advisors that teach you about foreign affairs. You don't really get Iran. You don't really understand nuclear weapons. You don't really understand the issues so well. So this, going back into the Iran deal, is mostly a political issue, or the Georgia thing, right? So you're so it's mostly a political issue, nothing more than that, right? So then of course you're going to suggest going back into the deal because that's pro-Obama. So you're like, okay, go back into the deal. That becomes a huge problem. So hopefully, Vice President-elect Biden, I trust his judgment on a lot of things, even though famously there was a Secretary of Defense named Bob Gates. It's not the guy from Microsoft, not Bill Gates, but Bob Gates was Secretary of Defense of George Bush and President Obama. It's interesting. President Obama asked him to stay on because he trusted him. And he has a famous line about Joe Biden. He said that Joe Biden has never made a correct decision in his career, 48 years, on foreign affairs. As whenever there's a foreign affairs decision to be made, Vice President Biden has always been on the wrong side of it. So Osama bin Laden, he was the one voice in the room saying we shouldn't go in together. And there's like lists of all these decisions that they had to make, and Biden was always on the wrong side of it. So I don't know, but I trust his judgment that he doesn't rush into dangerous things for political purposes. I hope that's I'm not let down on that. But we'll see. Okay, Rafi?
Yeah. What position is Iran in relative to where they were before Obama started negotiating, before they came to the table? And how do these
In
recent
what area?
peace?
In what respect? You say what position are they in terms of what nuclear?
Well, I mean, in terms of their capabilities, their economy, their willingness to negotiate, the whole political realm there, and how do the peace accords with the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco, how do they affect or alter these the coming negotiations?
So in terms of their position, it doesn't sound like they're suffering as much as they were at let's say the year 2010 when the negotiations started, and they were like their economy was so shot that Iran made a rule you weren't allowed to show chicken in television shows because people couldn't afford chicken. So it doesn't sound like it's that bad and the only reason I'm saying that is because I haven't heard those type of stories coming out. But I have seen a lot of stories where Iranians are talking about the poverty level, and that's what's causing COVID to spread so fast in Iran. And they don't have enough facility, they don't have enough resources to be able to fix it. At the same time, they're providing Hezbollah with close to $1 billion a year. So it's just a question of where you want to put your resources, right? That's the real issue. So that in that sense, yeah. In terms of the nuclear program, they're further ahead than they were in 2010 because for the last year they've been working on it again slowly, but they've been working on their nuclear program. So so that in that sense, that's where they are. Okay. Any other questions on Iran? No? Okay. Let's see. What do we have? Then we had Israeli elections. Okay, this is actually a good election. I'm actually excited. I'm actually getting very excited about this election. It's coming down to real issues, real good people running. This is not a joke anymore. This is not just we're trying to get rid of Bibi and who can we find that used to be an Israeli general and get him to find two of his friends to run against them. These are serious people, and they're real issues. They're not discussing dumb issues. They're not getting up and just insulting each other. They're talking about real reforms in Israel. This has good promise to it. Now, I do have to say that I'm going to give a lot of this election. I'm going to give a lot of my personal opinions on here. I'm not worried about the Israeli election anymore, even though I do have two Israelis here. But I mean, everything is so close in their views. But I do have to say that if the projections are true, that we're spreading the COVID vaccine so fast that Israel will be COVID free by March. Everybody will have their second shot, the entire country by March, where we'd all be COVID free. Then I think that we should just do away with Israeli elections until Bibi Netanyahu says he doesn't want to be prime minister anymore. I think that should be his reward for doing this that well. If you can get your entire country to be completely COVID free, then I think you just get everything that you want. If you want to like move into the Knesset, that's fine. You want to live at the Kotel, it's yours, no problem. I think that we should just hand the keys to the country over to the man and say, you saved all our lives. You ended COVID before anybody else could. So thank you. And, whatever you want. Now, if that doesn't happen, then I think that we should look at the other candidates. I just don't think that I think that like a prime minister's job, first and foremost, is to secure the safety and of your people. And right now, the greatest threat Israel is facing is Corona, as in every other country. And Israel is the number one by far country per capita giving out the COVID vaccine. It's just insane. It's insane that we have it before most countries, right? It wasn't developed in Israel. It's not Israeli companies developing it. So the fact that that Prime Minister Netanyahu was able to negotiate to have these millions upon millions of vaccines in Israel before other countries get it, that's amazing. That itself is amazing. So you're talking about this is a big accomplishment, and my hat off to him. I don't know how you don't vote for a guy after he saves your life. I don't know how you do it. And there's no way, I don't care what anybody tells me, there is no way Benny Gantz would have gotten this done. Not a chance in the world. No way. We'd be slowly getting the vaccine out, maybe August, September, October, we'd all have it. Not this fast. I mean, you're talking about right now, we're giving out at 150,000 people a day now, right? And it goes up every single day. They're talking about doing now 24/7. The chief rabbi is about to give a psak that you're allowed to be Mechal Shabbos to go get the vaccine. That would be the craziest thing in the world. They don't give it on kids, right? They don't have kids. We're talking about adults here. Right now, it's still. Right now, they've started even doing in Beit Shemesh. All my friends in Beit Shemesh. I don't know how they're getting it. I can't get it yet. But all my friends in Beit Shemesh who are younger than me are getting the vaccine. I think tonight they opened it up in Ma'ale Adumim was the first time they had it in Ma'ale Adumim tonight. I think I have a daughter with asthma, so she's actually your age. She's a junior, so she went to get it tonight. And in Ma'ale Adumim, and it's just insane how fast it's going. It's crazy to go. Like on Thursday, we were all like, "Holy cow! They gave out 40,000 in one day." And now they're at like 150,000 in one day. And it's just insane. It's just absolutely insane. So, but when you talk about the Israeli elections, you're talking about, and this is like really amazing, there's essentially three main people running, okay? There is, and you might have a fourth injected from the left, but you have three main people running. You have Prime Minister Netanyahu from the Likud party. You have Naftali Bennett from Yemima, who's now making his first run for prime minister. Because technically every time you run as the head of your party, you're running for prime minister, but there was very little chance that Naftali Bennett was going to make prime minister before this. Now he's saying, I'm polling high enough I could actually make a run for prime minister, so I'm running for prime minister. Doesn't mean like anything different than what he did last time. It just means that he has higher numbers popularity wise. And then you have Gideon Sa'ar, who many of you might not be familiar with. I think he's amazing, and he's just absolutely incredible, Gideon Sa'ar. And so he was a Likud guy. Both Naftali Bennett and Gideon Sa'ar were both number twos to Bibi beforehand. Both used to be in the Bibi's inner circle, and both left him. And Gideon Sa'ar, no one was 100% sure if he was going to be able to really put up a challenge to Bibi. In other words, right away when you start the election season about 3 months before, so you always have these parties, it's usually Naftali Bennett's party that gets like a ton of like polling seats right away. Like as the polls say, oh, they'll be at 20, 25. And then when election season usually happens, it dies down to about 16, 17 seats, you know, for like these flash in the pan type of parties that are popular for one election. But then Gideon Sar pulled out last week. He pulled out somebody named Zev Elkin. Zev Elkin is like really high up in Likud. And he left Likud. Zev Elkin leaving Likud is like Mitch McConnell leaving the Republican Party. It's just like this thing. It's just like incredible. Like when Gideon Sar announced that he's going to have somebody pull out, and then like Zev Elkin got up there, I was like, holy cow, you know. I'm friends with Zev Elkin's wife, so I like texted her. I'm like, wow, he gave an amazing speech. It's in Hebrew, but if you understand Hebrew, you should go on Gideon Sar's page and watch his speech. It was emotional. He talked about how great Bibi was for the country, but how Bibi's lost his way, and Bibi's corrupt, and Bibi created a feeling of fear in the Likud, and it's all about Bibi now. It's about his personality and how. And for Zev Elkin to say this is like crazy. It's crazy. You know, like, I mean, like Zev Elkin is a very loyal Likudnik. And for him to leave the Likud, that was the point where I think most of the country looked up and said, well, Gideon Sar is for real now. Like, this is not like taking one or two side people from the Likud. He just took like the number 2 or 3 person in the Likud with him. So that's huge. That's like, that's really, really big. So you have like a really good election. And then Gideon Sar today came out with 3 ideas that he's going to put in. The characteristics of the main parties. They're all right-wing parties. The parties have like no differences. That's the amazing thing about it. There's a reason why I'm not saying it is because if anybody could tell me the main differences between Yemima, Tikva Chadash is Gideon Sar's party and Likud, my hat off to you if you can find the space between the lines that's that thin. I mean, it's like it's a joke, you know, like the differences between the parties. They're really, really not that much different in this election. No matter what, it's going to be the most right-wing government that's ever been elected. That's guaranteed.
No, I'm saying like in general.
So I'm saying, there's no in general anymore because all the big parties in Israel are gone. It used to be Labor versus Likud. That was the big thing for like years. And when I say years, I mean like 50, 60 years. It was like left-wing versus right-wing. Now, like if you're a left-winger, you're just like, I don't know what Israel is anymore. Like, this is not my Israel anymore. I don't know. You know, like there's like a party that's going to get 5 or 6 people. You have a lot of Israelis in the last election, left-wing Israelis, voted for the Arab parties because they're like, okay, at least we get what they're doing. You know, everybody else is right-wing. We don't, you know, and all the Israeli left-wing parties, they feel like abandoned them and really didn't stick with them. You know, Peretz, the head of the Labor Party. So in the last election, he started talking about getting in with Bibi in a coalition. It's like the greatest joke in the world, you know, after Benny Gantz, who said the only reason why he's running is to make sure Bibi doesn't become prime minister and then join the coalition with Bibi. So there's no real, you're not missing anything. There are very few differences anymore. But Gideon Sar talked about real election reform. And I'll tell you, like, if I can remember all 3 of his ideas, but they're like really incredible ideas. The first idea was that putting a term limit on prime ministers. A prime minister can't be prime minister for more than 8 years. That's like, you know, I know in America that makes sense, but here we don't vote for the prime minister. So it's like, that would mean that like the guy could be on the list for his party, but he couldn't become prime minister. So like if we could won this next election, it would mean that like, and this law had been a law already, it would mean that Prime Minister Netanyahu could no longer be prime minister because there'd be a limit. And that, a lot of people see that and say, well, what's the advantage of doing that? Well, does that make any sense if everybody wants him to be prime minister? Because the sense is that if you're prime minister for too long, you become comfortable in leadership and it starts becoming about keeping yourself in office versus doing what's right for the country. And a lot of people feel that that's where Bibi's really gone off the proper path here. Okay. So you give 1 second of that. So then what you're saying is that like, okay, if the guy knows he's going to be out of office in 8 years anyway, then he's not making decisions in order to stay in power anymore because he knows he won't be in power anymore. So he's actually going to be making decisions for the good of the country. Odaya?
Um, okay, I'm not sure how to put my question together in like in a way that you understand it, but let's see. Um, okay, so I learned that any law that's passed after a certain deed that someone does, let's say I'm just making up a thing, like there wasn't a law against killing. And then someone goes and kills someone, and then after that, they make a law against killing. So
It
now
doesn't
they can't
apply.
sue him. It doesn't apply to him. So does it
Right.
apply to Bibi now?
So they would have to make the law, right? First of all, this law is not going to get passed if Bibi Netanyahu is prime minister, right? It's only going to get passed if Gideon Sa'ar is prime minister. But they would have to make the law that it starts at this and this date and applies to the following people, right? They would have to put that into the law. But generally, it's true. Generally, it's called grandfathered in, which is that when you pass a law, if it apply, right? So if I'm already violating the law, but I'm violating the law because, and it was allowed that to violate the law. They made the law afterwards, and I don't have to stop doing what I'm doing because they made a new law about it, or I have to stop, go like from this point on, I have to stop. But you can't get me on something that I did beforehand. Okay, that's that's the idea. But they would have to make this as part of the law that any politician that this from this point on, right? Or like if you've been prime minister for 6 years, it could be that maybe it doesn't apply to Bibi. It depends how they write the law. But if they're going to write this law, it's going to apply to Bibi. That's for sure. A second thing that I was very excited to see, because I think this is probably Israel's biggest problem when it comes to the Knesset. When I moved to Israel, one of the first things I did was I wrote a letter to 40 members of the Knesset asking if I could have a meeting for 5 minutes with them to talk about what they think is the best thing I could do for the country now that I've moved to Israel. I wanted to hear from 40 members of the Knesset. One wrote back to me. One. Okay. 3 of them added my email address to their weekly newsletter. Okay. But didn't write back to me, just added me onto their spam mail. Right. But only one respond to me. And I was just like shocked coming from America where members of Congress work for you. And if they don't respond to you, there's a very good chance you're not going to get reelected, because that means that you're really like ignoring a good percentage of your people. But like the number one rule for American politicians is respond to the people in your district, because you might not get reelected if you don't. Okay, that's like a number one rule. You're not going to find members of Congress. The member of Congress themselves might not call you back, but their staff is going to be back in touch with you. These people all ignored me. It was so shocking to me. And I couldn't understand it. I was like, I don't understand. These people all stupid. Like, I don't get this. Like, how does this work? And then I realized that as a member of Knesset, you're not responsible to the Israeli people. You're responsible to your party. So you only have to make the head of the party happy. You don't have to make anybody else happy. And if you're in Likud, which has a primary, so you don't have to make the head of your party happy. But to get on the Likud list, you only need 2,500 Likudniks to vote for you. So you really are only responsible for 2,500 people to vote for you. That's it. Other than that, there's no reason for them to talk to you. So why would they talk to me? Right? They're very busy people. They're doing God knows what, and literally only God knows what they do, because I have no idea what Knesset members do, because they do nothing all day long. So I'm very bitter on Knesset people. So now what Gideon Sa'ar wants to do is turn half the Knesset into elected by your region. So like Ma'ale Adumim would have a Knesset member. Renana would have a Knesset member, right? And these people would have Knesset members in your area, and then they would be responsible to the people in the area. Only that area would vote for them. So that means that if somebody from the area called them and said, "Hey, I'm from Ma'ale Adumim, you're my Ma'ale Adumim member of Knesset," and that person's going to respond to you, right? Because you could run against them. You could get everybody to be, "Hey, look, this person doesn't really care about us." So that would be like that really excited me. Rebecca, what was your question? I'm sorry.
What did the person write back that from the like that? What did they say you should do? Like,
it was very nice. He's no longer in Knesset, unfortunately. His name is Chilik Bar, and we actually did some really heavy behind the scenes stuff together. It was really crazy. We worked on like this insane deal together, just because like I had like somebody in America who wanted to pull. Like, one day I'll be able to write a book about this whole episode. It's crazy. I can't tell anybody about it yet, but like in 10, 15 years, I'll be able to tell people about like what happened. It was insane. It didn't work out in the end. If had it worked out, I'd be like one of the most famous Israelis. But it was a crazy thing behind the scenes, and like the only guy I could talk to was him, because he's the only guy who talked to me. So I was like, so that's it. But like it's very surprising. There's a member of Knesset that everybody loves. That like a new member of Knesset, everybody loves. People write op-eds about this new member of Knesset, and like the person, I know people the person ignores right and left. It's shocking to me. So if we did things about regionally, it would be much better. Ravi, do you have a question?
Yeah, just about this kind of representational thing. First of all, this was something that SAR proposed today.
Today, he said the first thing that he would pass, the first law, if he gets elected, is the term limits thing, and then the regional thing was the second suggestion he had.
And but how does this work? Is there like a primary for who? I mean, because it's usually just down the list on the party, and however many seats they get are the ones that go to the Knesset. So
I don't know how I'm not sure how it would work, but but England has it. England does it this way also in a parliamentary system. I don't know exactly. I've never studied it really to see how it works, but but maybe it doesn't have to do with party. Maybe you could even have people running outside the party structure. So that would be, imagine you just had independent.
That'd be very cool. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Hodea.
Okay, I have a question pretty similar, but if each region had a Chaver Knesset, then how would that work? Because there's only 120. So how would they divide that?
So first they want to increase the amount of Knesset members, but then you would do 60 would be by party and 60 would be by region.
People are going to agree to that to change the number?
Is what?
Are people going to agree to that to change the number?
You only need, unfortunately in Israel, you only need 120 people to agree to something to pass a law here. That also
this is like a historic thing. You can't just come and change that, no?
Well, Israel, it's actually very easy in Israel to change something because you don't have a whatchamacallit, you don't have a constitution. So the problem with not having a constitution is that the entire the entire Israeli Supreme Court thinks that they have like a God-given right to tell everybody what the law really is and what it's not, and change it whenever they want, even against the will of the people. So that's the problem by not having a constitution. In America, you don't have that because you have a constitution. Most countries have a constitution. Israel could never agree to a constitution because we're Jews, so that we would never agree to that. So that's why we don't have a constitution, and which creates a lot of problems. But you can change basically any law here because there are no laws about laws that you can't change. In America, you have laws there are certain laws in America that require not only Congress to vote to change it, but it requires the state legislatures. It requires 2/3 of them. So that's like 37 states, all their representatives in their private state legislators, right? So they have like, just like you have a Congress and a House and nationally that sits in Washington, every state has their own local government. That's also like 100 people large. 37 of those have to change in order to change an amendment in the Constitution. You have to get 37 to agree. It hasn't happened in decades, right? So it used to be much easier. Now it hasn't happened in decades. So yeah, in Israel, you don't have that, so it wouldn't be that hard. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Anything else? Oh, sorry. What?
Thanks.
Okay, no problem. Okay. Anything else, guys? Nope. Okay. Guys, have a very good night. And I'll see you guys next week.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great night. Bye-bye.